Hello, Vintage Stereo Restorers and Collectors on YouTube. Today I'm not going to talk about any particular stereo, any particular issue with stereos, none of that stuff. Although I'm trying to get this one done. I've got it cleaned up, working good, all the restoration done, but the cover, I wasn't too happy. The cover, so I repainted it. Really made it look nice. It's an easy one to do. But anyway, today we're talking about nostalgia. I have nostalgia for a number of different things. Some of them are like, why do I wear a fedora like this? Well, personally I'm not big on hats, but it's nostalgic for me. Both my grandfathers wore fedoras. Often they'd have a fedora on just for being out in the garden or cutting the lawn or going shopping. And then they had another one to go to church or to go into the office or go into the railroad yard, depending what they did, you know. To me, it's a bit of nostalgia and a bit of reverence for their memory. Other than that, I just think they look good, but I like the style. But I have come up with this, talking to my wife about this kind of stuff, this theory about nostalgia. Nostalgia is in everything. Okay, that's my theory. Let's call it nostalgia theory of time and space. There's so many examples that's not even funny. Like, for instance, Maxell tapes. It's got the little guy sitting in his chair with the speakers blowing his hair back. It sounds that good. That's nostalgia. That's on there even years after. There's other kinds of nostalgia, okay? If somebody talks about having a butler, or in the British term, a manservant, what comes to mind? Jeeves and Wooster. You know, it's just like he was the man's man. And then there's other ones, okay? Nostalgia. Look at TV commercials. Whenever there's a bunch of people getting together to have a summer barbecue out in the yard, even though it's millennials in the commercials now or Gen Z, they have a round Weber charcoal barbecue. It's almost always the kind of barbecue they have. It's not some 20 burner propane barbecue, you know, that looks like there's been a million of them made. No, it's the classic, and somehow that brings nostalgia of slowly cooking some steaks at Grandpa's house or with your parents. Because we did charcoal when I was a kid. Didn't always turn out that well. My dad actually gave the job to me to keep it running and to do the cooking. And I actually went out for Christmas one year and bought them a propane barbecue. So much for nostalgia there. But my first barbecue I bought at my first place was a Weber. One of those round ones, you know. And it's everywhere. It's in anything, and especially in the stereo business. And the stereo hobby business, whatever you want to call it. There's older equipment that has a certain look depending on the era and who made it. Okay, like the classic, you can't see the dial in this stereo here until you turn on, and it's backlit blue. There's new stuff, new receivers. I was just looking at some advanced videos on Advanced Paris, and those big blue meters. Tell me that's not nostalgia, right? Like it's harkening back. You're thinking, I like the blue display on my 74 Pioneer receiver. And then you like there's always, everything has some nostalgia in it. There's houses that are built not too far away from me they're doing this kind of a faux Victorian look on them. And they have like a second floor porch or a wraparound porch. They have styling cues like that. I'm trying to, you're thinking of, oh, it's kind of like an Anne of Green Gables house or something. There's so many examples of it that I think nostalgia is something, and I'm not an expert on this, but nostalgia is something that's almost programmed into us, or is part of the um, good vibe endorphin releasing mechanism in our brains that, and this is, look at collecting, okay? My dad and uncles were into Paganot clocks, vintage clocks that were built around, just around the World War I era. They were out of business by World War II. And why did they like those? Well, because it's what was around in the houses when they were kids. Like my dad was born in the Depression. And then there are like other, I remember my parents took our empty unfinished basement of our house, and in the 1970s made it into a rec room, and they made it into this kind of Charlie Chaplin theme. It's the only way I can put it. It was sort of like, there was a store in town called Rags for Men, and they had a Charlie Chaplin themed men's clothing store in the 70s. And there's something about that, they wanted to make the rec room like that. And it was actually cool. So we had, on one corner on the table, we had an Edison Ambarola phonograph. My dad went and found one. We had a couple vintage radios that I had found, when I got into it. We had all kinds of little knickknacks from that era, and of course the clocks. That's what was my father's nostalgia. My nostalgia seems to be for stuff from the 60s and 70s. That's when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, and into the early 80s, there's things from the 80s that trigger me into, it's just like, that's what, like lately it's been electronic music. And I was listening to some Devo last night, but some of the more obscure bands, from that era, like, I don't know, Flock of Seagulls wasn't that obscure. The Cure, things like that, that had kind of an electronic pop sound to them. That was kind of my nostalgia. Something about the time between when you're a kid and you're noticing things, this is how my theory works, until you're about the time where you're producing kids, you're a bit older. That period is turned into nostalgia in our memories. And sometime later, when you have a little more time, maybe a little more spending money, you're like, I want to buy that first Nintendo that I had. Or I want to buy the records I had in high school. I want Boston back, I want Cheap Trick back. It's all nostalgia stuff. And think about vinyl records. It might even be with vinyl records. Part of it is nostalgia. The big record, the big liner, how I put it, just listening to the music, it triggers nostalgia within us, triggers endorphins. But there's also a practical reason. It just sounds so good. Sure, CDs sound good too, but records sound good. Then there's this whole, like, let's finish with this vintage stereo stuff. I have bought different newer pieces that are, like, let's say made in the last 10, 15 years. And most of them are, I have a thing for NAD, some of their latest stuff. And it sounds good. I like the way it's made. They actually have capacitor coupled outputs on some of them. So it's kind of like a nostalgic way of building an amplifier. And then, of course, there's the look of it. It's kind of bland. It's black plastic with a little bit of lettering on it. It doesn't do much for me. I flip it on and go, that's a really clean sounding preamp, phono preamp. But when I listen to something like this Harman, and I see the blue dial and these nice solid metal knobs, the analog stuff. During the day I work with computers although I'm trying to retire from that. And so I'm doing touch screens and inputting and all that kind of stuff. I am so glad that when I decide to listen to music, there's stuff like this still around. I could have never imagined, if you would have talked to me, you know, like when I was 20, in my early 20s, working at a stereo shop, Mr. Stereo, Area Audio, and you said, this stuff, everything in this store is going to be a classic in 40 years. And going to be sought after, especially some of the better models. I would have gone, no, we'll have better stuff coming along. Stuff, you know, that is just as attractive, just as alluring, that will trigger nostalgia for us. But actually, that is happening to some extent, yes. But there is a certain nostalgia, and it's funny, I think I'm done with cassette tapes. You know, forever. I'm like, I had another one that wouldn't play after, that I recorded in 1977. But then, next thing I buy another deck and I get it working and I pull out some tapes, so I might make a couple new tapes. There's something about, there's the nostalgia for me, getting some new vinyl, which is probably some old vinyl, and then recording it onto a cassette and listening to it. Tremendous nostalgia. But I say nostalgia drives everything that we do, especially these days. You just have to look at those Super Bowl commercials. You know, like it's nostalgia, nostalgia, nostalgia. Anyway, I'd be interested in some of your comments about how you feel. What's nostalgic for you? Thanks for watching and listening.